Welcome back to the Impact Storytelling Podcast. I'm your host, Sabinemprobst, and today I'm joined by Dr. Joana Castro, marine biologist, researcher, and founder of AIM, Marine Environmental Research Association. Today, we're diving deep, literally and figuratively, into the world of marine mammals. With a career spanning more than 20 years, Dr. Castro has combined academic rigor, field innovation, and a passion to advocate for the intelligent social creatures that roam our oceans, cetaceans. From dolphins and whales off the coast of Portugal to global conservation policy, her work is a powerful intersection of science, education, and action. Welcome, Joana. I'm happy to have you on the podcast today. For the first question, if you had to describe the ocean using just one emotion, what would it be and why?
Peace.
That's nice. So it's a peaceful place for you.
It is a peaceful place for me, and it's sort of like an introspective moment as well. So it does give me a lot of serenity and peace.
That's nice. And what sparked your interest in marine science? Was there a defining moment or a personal experience that drew you to the ocean?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always been really connected to the ocean. My family spent a lot of time at the ocean. My grandfather was always at the beach, and taking me when I was a little kid. So that had definitely a big impact.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've always been really connected to animals as well. I've always had animals. And when I was a little girl, I was at summer camps at the Lisbon Zoo. And during those summer camps, we got in contact with a lot of problems that the animals face, a lot of conservation issues. And that really triggered a lot of interest from my side. And then, so that's how it kind of like started.
Yeah, it sounds really nice that you have been with your grandparents and family at the ocean at a young age already.
Yes.
And were there any early encounters with marine mammals that confirmed your career path?
Yes, actually, it was again when I was a kid, when I was 9 years old. I got the chance to get in contact with dolphins, was in captivity, but that really triggered the moment that I knew that I wanted to study and protect animals in the wild. So that was definitely a career, a moment that defined very well what I am today.
Nice. And how did each stage of your education refine your focus and passion for cetaceans?
So I've decided at a very early stage that I wanted to be a marine biologist, and specifically I wanted to work with whales and dolphins in the wild. But, when you're a kid and you tend to put some ideas in your mind, and I wanted, as I grow up, I wanted also to test if that was really what I wanted, you know, like, is this just an obsession or a passion, or is it like a career that I can have? So I tried multiple things, and I worked with multiple groups of animals. So I wasn't just so obsessed with dolphins. But every time I would do that, it would really confirm my willing to and my
passion.
My passion that I really wanted to work with dolphins and whales, and it was great, but it basically just confirmed what I already knew. So it was good.
And so there was never really a time in your career where you thought, oh, maybe I want to do something else. You tried out different animals, but you were like, no, that's it.
No, I was always for the good and worse, sometimes I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, that I was so determined since I was such as a young girl. But, it's not that I haven't done other things parallel to biology. I did, but everything was really to to come to this, really towards a final goal of having a career in marine biology and as a cetologist.
I think it really paid off that you stuck with your path and like we're walking towards it. If we're looking at your career now, I mean, it was good.
Thank you.
And from a student, you became a founder. You didn't just study the sea, you created a way to protect it. Yes. What inspired you to found AIM, Marine Environment Research Association?
You know, a career in marine biology is, it's difficult, particularly it's difficult everywhere in the world, but in Portugal, at the time I started, it was difficult, still is. And particularly a career with marine mammals or cetaceans. It is a difficult path. And so I basically created an opportunity to work, you know, a place where I could work and really could conduct my projects, my science, and have others to do the same as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. That's similar to what I did here in Austria, creating my organization, Sim Blue, that we can make ocean media. And it's a great way to make own opportunities.
Yes, exactly. Create a little bit of the opportunities as well.
Yeah. And what is AIM's mission now?
So we are a non-profit organization that focus on research studies in the marine environment, particularly with the dolphins and whales, so cetaceans. We also do a little bit of work with turtles and sharks, but cetaceans end up being the main core of the organization. And we intend to be a reference for science and hopefully contribute a lot towards the education of, you know, the public, the general people, and schools as well. We have a lot of educational programs with schools, and of course, mainly that our research contributes as well to conservation measures to be put in place that really helps these animals.
How do you combine the scientific research, education, and advocacy in its approach to conservation?
It is a difficult balance because, you know, in a way we're doing science that it's very strict, you know, has our own methodologies, and sometimes it's really hard to communicate to the public. And that's why we have at AIM, we have a multidisciplinary team. So, you know, we have actually people from the communication area that helps us to put our scientific findings more towards a general understanding of you know, so that people can understand it in a better way.
Yeah, that's really important to communicate it in a way that the general public can understand it.
Yes. Yes, because sometimes, you know, it is important that we find our sharings within the scientific community, obviously. But it is really important that that message is also passed to the general public in a way that they can understand it without needing to be a scientist or understand the science behind, basically.
Exactly. How does AIM collaborate with other organizations, governments, and communities?
Well, you know, cetaceans are, most of the cetaceans are really mobile creatures, right? So they move a lot. So if I'm doing work here in the south of Portugal, in our study area, these animals are not here all the time. They actually move. They move to Spain, they move to France, they move to Morocco, so they move to other areas. And, you know, for us to fully understand all these movements, all these behaviors, it is important to collaborate with other colleagues and have partnerships with other colleagues. And that really helps us to have a global vision of, you know, of the groups that we study. It helps us grow as scientists as well. You know, when we collaborate with other colleagues, we learn other methods, we learn other technologies, we brainstorm about subjects, and that really helps the science to move forward. So I consider that quite essential. And yes, and that's why we have a lot of collaborations with the people, not just in Europe, but also from other places in the world.
And let's talk about the stars of the show, the cetaceans themselves. For those less familiar, what exactly are cetaceans and what defines this group?
Yes, so cetaceans are divided in two groups, right? We divide them in, they're all whales. People sometimes get confused. Oh, we have dolphins, you have whales. Yes, we do. But in the end, they're all whales. And the difference between what we call the true whales and the other whales, or the dolphins, it's because the true whales, which is called the group of the Misty set, is the ones that have baleen plates. And these are the baleen plates and other characteristics. But these are the main difference, the fact that they have baleen plates. And then dolphins that belong to another group, which is the Odontocete suborder. And this is the whales that have tooth. So we basically have whales, and then we have whales with baleen plates, and we have whales with tooth.
Yeah.
And this is really like the best way to separate them. So dolphins will be toothed whales, right? So they have their teeth, and that will put them in that category of the toothed whales. While, for example, if we talk about a blue whale has baleen plates, so that will put this animal in the group of the baleen plate whales, the true whales, and the technical term, the Misty set.
Yeah. It's amazing how many different species there are. I have like a book of cetaceans, and I was reading through it to prepare for the podcast. And it was really amazing, and how different they sometimes look, but then also similar again. But it must be really hard to identify them also out in the water. I have some more questions later about that.
Yes. And there's quite a lot of diversity. We have about 94 species of dolphins and whales, so cetaceans. So it's really diverse. Of course, there's other taxonomic groups that are way more diverse, but still we have quite a good variability, let's say.
Yeah. And in that book I read there are 14 cetacean families. Is that right?
Yes.
And
yes.
What do they have in common biologically and behaviorally? I mean, you already said there are two different groups.
Yes.
But what do they have in common?
So they're all mammals. They all live in the sea. They all have come to a sort of adaptations from moving to the land environment towards the ocean environment. So they have their bodies very fusiform, so they can swim better. It's more hydrodynamic. Yeah. They have lost their hair. As mammals, we have hair.
Yeah.
And cetaceans have lost their hair. And that is to contribute towards their, swimming performance. It makes them, again, more hydrodynamic, more smooth underwater. A little bit like, when professional swimmers shave their body.
Yeah.
So, it's to create less,
stretch.
Yes, to make it easier to swim, and that they can actually move better. So cetaceans have lost the air. Although, for example, when you think about baleen whales, the plates, it is a transformed air, is some sort of hair as well, but it's it's sort of a modified one. And also when they're born, dolphins and whales, when they're born, they have some whiskers. So they actually have a little bit of hair, and then they lose that with the time. So it's not that they don't have any hair, but they tend to lose it. It's what we call a sort of a vestigial, figure that comes from the evolution.
Time. Wow, I did not know that. That's cool.
And then they have a lot of adaptations as well. To the fact that they can hold their breath. Some animals can hold it more, less. So at a physiological level, that also has a lot of adaptations. And have their flippers, like they're if you look at a skeleton, you will see all the fingers that end up being having this structure of the flipper to make it easier to swim. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Oh, I'd love to hold my breath also so long as cetaceans can.
That will make my life much easier.
Yeah, it would be so much easier.
Them, for sure. Yes.
For filming them too, we would be so quiet and we could just stay really long.
Exactly.
It would be so nice.
It would be great. And, we can practice and get better at it. Yeah. But they're really pros. So it is a little bit difficult. We have animals that can hold up 40 minutes, 1 hour, sometimes more than 1 hour. Yeah. So it really makes the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we can manage that. No, even if we practice a lot. But in general, dolphins do their little swims and they come up quite fast. But they can hold it if they want, of course. Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about some key species studied in Portuguese waters, like the common dolphin, Delphinus delphis, bottlenose dolphins, or orcas? And I also have some photos here of them that we can take a look at. These are your photos from AIM.
Yes.
Maybe you can tell us what we are seeing in the first picture.
This is a minke whale. And it's one of the species of baleen whales, so the true whales, that we usually see here in Portugal. So we have about 14, 15 species that we see here in the waters of the Algarve. Some are more common and they actually occur all year and it's easier to observe them. Others are just, they show up. We don't really know what they're doing here, and then they go, So, but minke whales, as is shown here in this picture, it's one of the animals that we have all year round here in Portugal, and it's one of it's a small species of whale. Well, small. It's about 10 meters long. And it's one of the main species of baleen whales that we have here. Yeah.
Amazing. And what do we have here?
The rhesus dolphin. So this is it's on the odontocete, so it's a toothed whale. They are common, but we don't see them all the time. Okay, so we see them every year. But a few sightings per year, so not all the time. And we see a lot of these groups with calves. These animals are deep divers. They like to habit to live in areas where there's the possibility to dive quite deep. Yeah. And the areas that we have here in the south of Portugal, they're not very deep unless you go a little bit more offshore, so closer to shore. It's not very deep. So a great place to see these animals is actually in Portugal, in the Açores. In the islands, you can see a lot of these species, which is beautiful.
I saw another photo of that one in your post, and it was completely white. So they come in different colors, or?
So the rhesus dolphins, they're really cool because they actually, when they're born, they're a little bit gray, sort of brownish, so they're not white. And then as the time passes and they get older, they get these scars and become quite white. So this is resulting from the scars.
It's from the scars.
Yeah. So
are they fighting a lot?
They do interact a lot with their prey and between each other. And the older they get, the whiter they are. So we can actually estimate an age of the animal, relatively. We can say, oh, this is a quite old animal because it's very white.
Yeah, okay. Is it like we get white hair and they get white skin?
well, more or less. Yeah, we can bear that in mind as a reference.
And the fin on top, that's the dorsal fin?
Yes, so that's the dorsal fin. And we actually use this dorsal fin to identify the individuals. Mm-hmm.
And does that also get white in that animal? Or
a little, it does, but a little bit less, just because the interactions and the interactions with the prey. But yeah, it does. And it gets quite a lot of marks as well. Yeah.
Okay. And here we have a dolphin.
Yes, so here we have Bottomos Dolphins. And Bottomos Dolphins, they're actually probably the second most cited species of dolphins that we have here in the Algarve, in the south of Portugal. The first one we see a lot is the common dolphin, so that will be the main species.
Is this the common dolphin?
This one, yes. Yeah. So you can see the yellow patch and the hourglass that it forms, and these are the ones that we see the most. And then secondly, it would be the Bottomos dolphins, as you previously showed.
Cool. And these you see all closer to the coast. Can you see them from land, or do you also have to go on boats to see them?
No, you can actually see the Bottomos from shore, and you can see them from the beach. But it's not. You can do that, and it's possible, but it's not like an everyday event. They tend to be a little bit more out. But it is sometimes in the summer. It's actually really cool because people are at the beach, and the beaches here are really, really full during the summer. Yeah. It's a very touristic area, and sometimes people can see them really close to the beach. Sometimes 100 meters, 200 meters from the beach itself. So it's actually really cool when that happens. But it's not the most usual thing.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people say dolphins are very playful, and sometimes it can be dangerous to divers. Did you hear about stories like that divers would get a bit scared of the dolphins because they're so playful? And I think a lot of people don't realize when they're actually next to you, they're really big. They're not so small and cute like they look from far away.
Yes. No, it is a very good point. People associate these animals, and they are beautiful. They're extremely intelligent. They're very, very social creatures. They do like to play. But they are wild animals, and they can be really rough, and the way they play sometimes can be really rough as well. Although most of the times these animals don't try to interact with us, and that happens a lot when you have swimming with dolphins in the wild. You can see that most of the times the animals just really go away, or they're passing. But every other time it happens that they get curious, because they are extremely curious and social. And so, with divers, and depending on the areas, the animals can get a little bit closer. They can look, they can play a little bit. It's understandable that divers sometimes get a little bit scared. Mainly because we do not speak the same body language behavior that dolphins do. And it is sometimes hard for people to understand. And what sometimes might be perceived as really playful behavior might actually be a behavior of get away, like a behavior where the animal is telling you, don't do this, get away from me. But we are interpreting that as the opposite. And that usually is not the best and creates a lot of stress on the animals. So here we have killer whales. It's animals that occur here in our coast. They belong to a resident population here in the Iberian Peninsula. Also moving, a little bit north to France and also to Morocco. But they live in this area. And here in Portugal, we see them every year again, but we don't see them all the time. So it's kind of like we see them maybe 5 times a year, between 5 and 10 times a year. So it's not a lot. So for you to see killer whales here in the south of Portugal, you're quite lucky.
And are they just passing through? Are they migrating, or they really are Yeah, usually, because I might have been really ignorant, but for a long time I really thought that they're just in colder waters. So I was surprised to hear that
killer
there too.
whales are an amazing creature because for several reasons, obviously, but they are the biggest of the dolphins species. So they are the biggest of the dolphins. And one thing is we associate killer whales always to the cold waters, because that's where we tend to see them more, and there's some resident populations as well, and so on. But actually, killer whales are probably the most cosmopolitan dolphin we have, or cetacean that we have, because they occur everywhere in the world.
That's crazy.
Either it's hot, cold, middle temperature, either is closed seas, so they really occur everywhere. So they're very, very cosmopolitan. And here they are mainly passing. They're probably entering towards the Mediterranean, towards the Strait of Gibraltar and so on. And they're probably following the tuna. That's what we think is happening.
And what makes the common dolphin particularly interesting or impactful ecologically in the Algarve?
Common dolphins are one of the most common animals, and that's why they have that name, common dolphin. They used to be really, really common in the Mediterranean, Atlantic, so on, so on, so on. But the populations have really declined, particularly in the Mediterranean. They're very threatened in the Mediterranean. And although it is a species that occurs in a lot of places in the world, it is a species that we don't know that much about. We know a lot about their physiognomy and their diet habits, and that we have that information from strandings and from necropsies and from studying their diet habits. But in terms of behavior, we don't know that much about these species, because they tend to be hard to study. They move a lot. They're very hard to identify at an individual level. They form groups of thousands of animals, and that makes things really, really tricky. And so there's a lot to understand about these animals. And common dolphins here in Portugal just make them really important in the sense that they're the one that occurs the most. So these animals, you see them, you have a really good probability of encounter them in the entire country, really. And also we know that, for example, here in the Algarve, they use these areas to reproduce, to feed. So it is an important ecological species here.
So as I said earlier, dolphins are not that small, but what is actually the smallest whale species and what is the largest?
Okay, the smallest, it's probably the pygmy right whale. The pygmy right whale, it's a species that lives in the South Hemisphere. You can see them in Australia and other places in the South Hemisphere. That is probably the smallest. And then the biggest is the blue whale. So blue whale are really big. So that would be the smallest, which is about 6 meters. And then you have animals of 27, 28 meters.
6 meters is the smallest?
The smallest, the pygmy right whale is about 6-7 meters.
Wow, cool. Amazing. And how long do whales and dolphins usually live, and how long are their pregnancies?
Okay, so it depends on the species. It really depends on the species of dolphins and whales. Whales tend to live a lot of time, long time, like a long time. Dolphins have a little bit of a shorter spans, but for example, we can have Bottomos Dolphins with 50 years. We can have killer whales with 90 years. We can have whales above 100 years and more. So it really, it's really different from species to species.
Yeah.
Common dolphins, for example, live less, like about 30 years. So it really It's very different.
And how long do their pregnancies last?
The pregnancies in general, it's around a year. It also varies between the species. Some species will have it 10, 11 months. Others will have 13 months, 14 months, so it's kind of like around, around a year you will get it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you see them often all together as a family. So how do maternal bonds manifest in different cetacean species?
Yeah, so it varies between the species. Some have really strong maternal bonds, others have it as well, but the calves become more independently earlier. They're more solitary animals, others are more social animals. So it really depends on the species. But in general, cetaceans are, the bonds that it's created between the maternal bond between the mother and the calf, either it's a whale or a dolphin, it's quite strong. Yeah. And it can last a lot of years. So in dolphins, you can have animals that never leave the groups. For example, killer whales, they tend to stay in the groups. Maybe some of the males will leave the group, but the females tend to stay in the group. If you're talking about Bottomos Dolphins, for example, the mothers will take care of their babies up to 40 years old. So it really is a lot of maternal care, maternal investment.
Yeah. And do they also express emotions? Have you observed that in your research? Because I've seen often that one whale is beached and then the others from the pond are then also coming and being there. Is that because of an emotional bond, or is that something else behind it?
Yeah. So the emotional, if they are emotional creatures, yes, I think they are sentient creatures, and we have had experiences and actually have had research on that, on the care behavior, where you actually, and particularly in grieving behavior in dolphins. So we have observed that. We had an adult that lost the calf. So we saw a dead calf, and we would see that animal around the calf, and you would see what can only be described as a grieving behavior. Others supporting that female as well. So it really is a strong bond that exists, particularly between the mother and the calf, but also as a group. They do have relations between them, and the strandings that you were mentioning, the mass strandings. Sometimes we don't fully understand it, but it could be that the bond is so strong that they just follow the lead animal and they end up all beaching themselves, or there might be other factors influencing that as well.
Okay. And what are some of the unique cognitive traits that cetaceans display?
Okay, so they do have a lot of things that they display that are not necessarily super unique, but really interesting, and that really show how social and how the social intelligence of these animals are really big and important. So, for example, dolphins have the capability of recognizing themselves, which is something that we thought for a long time that belonged only to humans and primates. But we know now that they have this self-awareness of their self. So that's really interesting. They have a lot of complex social structures that really different between the species as well. So you have animals that present a fission-fusion society. We have, for example, common dolphins do that. We have animals as the killer whales, for example, they have the matrilineal pods and structures, so it's a little bit different. We have bonds between some individuals, like, for example, male bonds, which is very common to observe in Bottomos dolphins, where they pair up and really have their body, so and that can last a lifetime. What else? Their capability of communicating, that's really unique and special as well. The echolocation, they have a lot of vocal learning, so they can actually imitate and learn different languages almost, so it's really interesting. They have, for example, on that acoustic level, they have signature whistles, and signature whistles are sort of like, if we want to say something comparing to humans, it would be the sort of the name. It's unique of each individual, and it's kind of like the name of that individual, that acoustic recognition. I suppose those, the fact that they can use tools, that's really cool as well. So also a thing that was thought for a long time to just belong to humans and primates. But now we know that dolphins can use tools to solve their problems, so that's problem solving. It's really interesting as well. I suppose those would be some of the traits that they have that are quite special.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And have you ever felt like a dolphin was studying you while you were studying them? Or do you think they can recognize you when you see the same dolphin often?
Well, they can certainly recognize us, especially populations that tend to live in the same place. So the resident populations, they tend to know their area very well. And if you are a researcher, it's quite possible that they recognize your boat, that they even recognize at an individual level. That's for sure. Although here, I do not think that most of the dolphins know who we are and what we're doing, because we have a lot of animals that are just passing by and coming and going. So I don't really think they recognize us. But what we do see is that sometimes they get very interested in us, especially when we're doing our studies and we're looking, and they're kind of like, they come to the surface, they look at you, they're kind of like interested in you as well. So that can happen. And in a way, it's they're observing you, and maybe they're studying you as well. Who knows?
What are the humans doing today?
Yes, exactly. Oh, I'm sure, they if they think that, I'm sure that sometimes might happen in their minds, like, what are they doing? Because they're really curious. So if you have a new camera, they might kind of like look at the camera and kind of like try to understand what it is. If you're using a new tool to study them, they got very curious.
Amazing. You just earlier mentioned the fission-fusion dynamics. Can you tell us more about that in dolphin societies and what you found in the Algarve region?
So the fission-fusion societies is a fluid society where animals join and leave that same group. And they might join or leave for different reasons. So imagine that you want to that you live in open ocean in an area where you have predators. So maybe it would be a good strategy to have a bigger group. So you would have animals that would join and form a bigger group towards the protection of the group from potential predators. But for example, if you have a really big group, that might be very difficult to organize the feeding moments and to hunt. So maybe that same group will split into smaller groups to, for example, perform feeding activities. So that will reduce the competition between the individuals in the group, and that could be beneficial. So what dolphins do is that they adapt towards their situations, their behavior and their reality, they play with this dynamic. So they might form bigger groups, they might form smaller groups. They can change during completely different times of the day. And you can see that happening very constantly or a little bit more stable. So again, it's going to depend on the behavior. So common dolphins actually they're quite fluid. They do have a lot of fission-fusion happening along the day. But some other species or groups, or even in different areas, they might behave in a different way. So that's why it's so important that you study these in the context of the habitat and the environment, right? Because, for example, although common dolphins show a lot of fission-fusion here in the south of Portugal, that doesn't mean necessarily that they will show this type of behavior in a different area. Maybe the groups are more stable, or maybe they're even more fluid. Who knows? Yeah. But as a species, they are fluid.
How do individuals communicate within pods and across different groups or species? Can they talk with other pods, or are they speaking in different languages as we do in different countries?
Yes. So, so it's really interesting, the acoustic behavior of these animals. You know, they are acoustic creatures. Dolphins and whales are acoustic creatures. This is an important system for them to orientate themselves. And they do produce a lot of clicks, and they do produce a lot of whistles. So talking about the dolphins specifically. So dolphins have this echolocation system, right? Which it's like a bat. They will send a sound, the sound would hit the object, it will reflect, and it will create a visual image, an interpretation of what they have in their surroundings. And they use this a lot to orientate themselves in the water, in areas where you don't have good visibility, for example. And that's really important. In really deep waters, for example, where there's no light. So this is for them to sort of navigate their environment. And then they do have the whistle, and for that they produce the clicks. And the clicks are mainly used for echolocation. Depending on the behavior, the whistles will be slightly different, you know. So some animals will use a lot of whistles while they're traveling. Others will not gonna make any whistles. There will be just silence. When they're socializing, you can hear a lot of whistles because that is a moment that it's quite important. So that will be some of the ways that they use. Of course, we talked about the signature whistles. This is sort of really specific. We know the songs from the whales during the mating period. So that it's another acoustic important sound. So they use this to communicate within their own group, but also with other groups. So there's sounds that can be specific of specific groups and families.
Okay. But they do interact with each other, like different
But they can
groups.
interact with each other, and they can produce more general sounds of that species or of that group. So yeah, they do interact acoustically as well with each other.
And do sometimes members of the pod, like individuals, leave? And if so, why? And what consequences does it have to the pod or to them?
Yeah. So yes, we know that some animals leave the pods, and that's important because that will create some genetic dynamics, right? So if I'm in my family and I just stay here and reproduce within my cousins and brothers and sisters, it becomes very saturated, right? So it is important to have this genetic flow. Yeah. And so Some animals do leave the pods and others don't and stay. So it really depends on the species. But males tend to be the ones leaving the pods and females tend to stay more within the pods. But that can really change.
And is it like when two pods meet each other, then the one just goes to the other and they exchange? Or is one just really leaving when no one else is there and then just looking for another pod?
Yeah, sometimes, the young males, for example, when we think about Bottomos Dolphins, sometimes the young males that form these alliances when they're young, they're the bachelorette groups, and they will just leave. They are literally that. They're a bachelorette group that will just like do their thing and probably join another group or even maybe come later again to the group. So it's really various.
Okay. Studying elusive ocean giants requires some high-tech detective work. Oh. What techniques are used to identify individual cetaceans, and how effective are features like flukes, dorsal fins, and blow patterns?
So they're really useful because since the 70s or early 70s, we discovered that if we use the dorsal fins or if we use the flukes in whales, that will have a unique form that allows us to recognize each individual. So it's like our fingerprint in a way. Yeah. It changes with the years, but it doesn't change that dramatically. So we really let us keep tracking of the individuals over the years. So we will look into the marks, the cuts, the coloration, the form, the shape of these dorsal fins or of the fluke to help identify the animal. So that's what we call the photo identification. Yeah. We can also use pigmentation, depending on the species. For example, with whales, that can be really helpful. With dolphins, sometimes it's a little bit easier to just use the dorsal fin because, sometimes we have groups of so many animals that become a little bit difficult to use other patterns or other characteristics to recognize. So the dorsal fin tends to be the selected one for dolphin identification. But if you have a really small population, you can use other features to also identify them.
Great. And are dolphins the easiest to identify because they jump out of the water rather than like other whales that just look at a little bit?
Well, there are species that are slightly more photogenic. It seems that they're a little bit easier to photograph, and that actually helps a lot, right? So, for example, common dolphins, they tend to be difficult to photograph, to use for photo identification. We can see them jumping and we can photograph them, and that's all good. But when it comes to the photo identification process, it is a little bit difficult to photo ID them because they have very clean dorsal fins with some individuals don't have a lot of marks. So you just really, and we have a lot of animals. So we just go really for the very marked animals. Then you have bottlenose dolphins, for example, which have bigger dorsal fins and are slightly easier to photograph as well. When they come to the surface, they tend to take a little bit more time. They tend to not create so much water in front of the dorsal fin when they're passing. So all of that facilitates the process of getting a good picture of that fin that we can then use later on. So, for example, for killer whales, we use the dorsal fin. They have really big dorsal fins, so that makes it a little bit easier to photograph. But I'm not saying that it's easier to photo ID killer whales. Actually, it can be quite challenging because the animals sometimes are not very marked, and so we actually use other characteristics to help identify the animals, such as the eye patch and the saddle patch as well.
Can you also tell us about your bioacoustics project and the challenges of studying communication in noise-polluted marine environments?
So we do have some acoustic projects going on. One of the studies we have is really to try to understand the changes in behavior, acoustic behavior, that it's been produced by the impact of dolphin watching boats in the area, so touristic boats in the area, and how's that affecting the presence of these boats, how it is affecting the acoustic behavior of dolphins. So this is one of the studies, but you can use acoustics pretty much to everything. And as I said before, they're really acoustic animals. So they really communicate a lot. They use sound all the time. So it's really important for them. And that's why acoustics is so important. We need to better understand how they work with the sound and how their life depends on that. And of course, when you live in an area that it's very acoustic, but at the same time, if it's very acoustically polluted, so if you have a lot of acoustic pollution, it becomes very difficult to communicate. So we know that, for example, imagine that you are in a club at night dancing. The sounds of the clubs, the music, it's usually very loud, right? And when we try to communicate, like, let's say we're dancing, the two of us are in a club and we're dancing, and I'm trying to tell you that I want to go home because I'm tired. And you're like, oh, you wanna what? And I'm like, I want to go home. And we just have this difficulty. It happens to everybody, right? When there's a lot of noise around us, our communication just becomes a little bit more difficult. Oh, I want to eat fish. And you understand, what? You want to eat meat? No, I want to eat fish. So kind of like the message might not be properly passed. And that can create quite a lot of issues within the communication of the group or the individuals. So making their life a little bit difficult. So it's masking the sounds.
What's the current scientific understanding of whale and ship collisions, and how can we mitigate them?
So what happened with the ship collision sometimes is that the ships have their routes and they cannot change their routes that easily. And sometimes animals are at the surface, they're sleeping or they're distracted, and they don't realize because the noise environment, it's so polluted, there's so much noise that they might just be resting and sleeping, and they have their right of having a little bit of a break. And in areas, particularly, this is a problem, particularly with the big whales. And what happens is then that the ship cannot change their route or doesn't have enough time to change the route and end up colliding with the animal. And that happens in a lot of areas where there's a lot of marine traffic, mainly with cargo vessels, ship vessels, and so on. And so some of the recommendations which are really important is in areas where we know that there's whales, where they occur, or in specific times of the year where you're going to have the whales in that area. It is really important to first identify very well where the whales can be or will be, and then particularly reduce the speeds. Because if you reduce the speed, that will give time for the animal to realize that you are there, and that gives them time to move away, basically.
And you just mentioned the animals sleeping. How do they sleep?
So they tend to use half of their brain, because the thing is, dolphins and whales, they are conscious breathers, right? So they need to think that they need to breathe. We don't think about it. We just breathe, right? We're sleeping. We got into a full deep sleep and we continue to breathe, but that's not the case for them. So they really need to think. And so that's why they keep half of their brain on and also paying attention to their surroundings, potential predators, and so on. And then they swap between one hemisphere and the other hemisphere.
Do they just float? while they sleep?
Some of the animals stay really quiet at the surface and just float. Others just do really shallow dives, very at the surface and very calm. Others actually sleep with their heads underwater and just like vertical, or sometimes coming a little bit up to the surface for a quick breath. So there's different ways, but in general, dolphins stay very sort of shallow movements, or some species could stay at the surface, just lodging a little bit.
The behavior of orcas interacting with boats has gained worldwide attention. What is your interpretation of what's happening there, why they're doing it?
So here in the south of Spain and the south of Portugal, and now it has expanded to other areas of the Iberic Peninsula and France and Morocco. So we start having 6 years ago, more or less, these interactions between the killer whales and the boats. And that started mainly with the sailing vessels, but has escalated to other vessels as well. And when initially we thought this was a behavior that was specific of a few individuals, because they are so smart and so social, they actually share things between them. And they share this between their own pod, their own family, but with other pods, with other families, with other groups. And so what started as an event and a unique event has spread through the population, and now we have a few animals that are doing this. The scientific community, it's not 100% sure why they're doing this, but most of the indications seem that this is related to a play behavior. But what happens sometimes is that, because it started with juveniles, and sometimes when you're a juvenile, you have a little bit of what it's called the play rough, like you play a little bit rough. You actually hurt each other sometimes, but the problem with the killer whales is that they are really big. They weigh a lot, and what it can be a little bit of a play rough for ones can really be quite destructive for others, and for the boats particularly. There were some indications or some possibilities in the air that this could be an aggressive behavior. That hypothesis is not completely excluded, but the indications that the scientific community has now is really mainly related to a playful behavior. Unfortunately, the boats don't see it as a playful behavior. It is quite scary, and it is a really big problem at a conservation level, because this population, it's endangered, it's highly protected. We don't want any problems with the people in the water, in their sailing vessels, while they're enjoying the sea. So right now is a question of mitigating these interactions the best way possible. So there's a lot of, there's guidelines to what to do, what not to do when you have a group of killer whales. Basically, I think that at this moment, we should just avoid any sort of contact with killer whales here in the Iberic Peninsula. And hopefully this will be a behavior that will pass. It will end up being, the animals will at some point stop it. But what is important right now, it's really to reduce those interactions as much as possible for the human safe perspective, which is essential, but also from the animals' perspective and safety, because this can have really serious impacts on the population as well.
You can imagine,
Because as you can imagine, some people can become really aggressive when, and as any animal would, right? If you are being, or if you feel that you are under some stress, right? And some in an environment that might not be so positive, and that you feel that your life is somehow threatened. And that can result in activities from the people that are not so positive for the animals, and that can actually put them in a very complicated situation and even kill those animals. So it is important that right now the scientific groups work together between them, but also work with the sailing communities, with the fisher communities, with the users of the sea, basically, to try to mitigate this the best way. So basically, nowadays there's online platforms where you can see and sort of follow where the killer whales are. So you know that the groups are coming in that direction. So there's going to be more tendency to potential interactions. So that's when the government advises not to go in that direction, or be careful of that direction because there are killer whales in the area. Stay closer to shore, or go a little bit more offshore because they are in a certain area. So if we can really map where these animals are in a better way, we can reduce these interactions.
Is that also beneficial for research? So the researchers know more where the orcas are going?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Right now, some of these killer whales have actually tags, GPS tags, and we can clearly see where they are. And that really helps on a management perspective as well. But also, scientifically, we get much more information of what these animals are doing and where they're going.
At least something positive out of that.
Yes, exactly.
So we talked a lot about dolphins. And is there any sea creatures that dolphins really don't get along with?
Oh, good question. Well, I suppose sharks will be one of the more obvious ones. It's not that, it depends on the shark as well and the species of shark, but because some species of sharks will predate on dolphins, dolphins tend to avoid these animals and tend to be a little bit more anxious. There's other species like marlins, the really big marlins, which they sometimes can get a little bit afraid as well and avoid. Sharks is the most obvious one, I suppose. But I'm sure there's might be cases where dolphins avoid other sea creatures in specific areas, potentially.
Well, these were animals that are kind of dangerous to the dolphins. Another thing that's kind of dangerous to the dolphins might be human activities. What are the biggest conservation challenges facing marine mammals in the Atlantic and Mediterranean regions?
So that's a very good and complex question, right? There are so many challenges depending where you are. You have areas where you have more traffic, and that can create problems with the collisions of animals, with the whales, for example, in the Mediterranean, in the Strait of Gibraltar. You have areas that are very impacted by whale watching activities, dolphin watching activities, so the tourism. And so some populations of dolphins are seriously impacted by that. You have activities such as fishing. In some areas, you will going to have more fishing, and others not so much, and that's going to impact the populations there. But fishing, for sure, it's a really big one. Collisions in the Mediterranean, and whale watching, it is everywhere, and it's an important activity that has a really strong potential from the conservation point of view as well, and from the tourism. The tourist perspective, so from the human perspective, we can really change mentalities there, but it needs to be done in a very sustainable way. You have other things like aquaculture that can have serious impacts on the dolphins populations as well. It really depends where you are and what are the species there, but definitely fishing in the Atlantic, it's an important one.
Like with bottom trawlers or something, where they just
all types of fishing, person fishing, bottom trawlers, all types of fishing have different interactions with different species as well.
Yeah. What should people avoid doing if they encounter dolphins or whales in the wild?
What they should avoid?
Yeah.
Well, it is very important that if you are in a boat, for example, and you encounter whales and dolphins, that you approach these groups with with a lot of caution, right? So you need to have the right way to enter the group. You need to keep a very slow speed. Try to be quiet. Not to feed. Try to touch or swim with these animals. Do not stay for too long, depending again on the places where you are in the world. There are actually guidelines in place for you to approach these animals and what to do and not to do. But definitely the way you approach these animals, it is really important. It's very important that you are not chasing the group, from the back, or that you're not approaching the group or cutting the group from the front and cutting the group in the middle. So you should always keep a parallel position from the boat and the group of dolphins. And try to just keep the distance. This is really important, to keep the distance. Sometimes people really want to be on top of the animal, but let's not forget that these are really big creatures. So particularly whales, so we can see them quite well from afar. If we're 30 meters away, 50 meters away, or sometimes 100 meters away, we can see them really, really well. We don't need to be super close. And the dolphins, they are smaller, but on the other hand, they usually are in groups. So you can get the chance to see more of them. So there's no need to be on top of the animals. I would say that that's really important.
If I'm a tourist now, for example, and I am taking photos or videos, is there anywhere I can upload those to help scientists to show where I was and what animals I've seen there?
Yes, so there's some apps and some websites that you can upload the photos of that you've done during your whale watching trip. Some are more specific of certain regions than others. Also, a good way is for you to possible reach out to some teams that are working in the area and kind of like share your result, like your photos with those scientists. And that becomes really important, particularly in areas where you don't have a lot of information or that are very difficult to access.
Are there any other ways that normal people that aren't scientists in that field can help to protect dolphins? Anything we can do?
Well, I think there's a lot we can do to protect these animals, and some things don't really need to be necessarily a life-changing activity. You can support research groups financially. You can support research groups with donations, not just financially, but of equipment and material as well. Social media nowadays is a really important platform to help spreading the knowledge and the problems that these animals are facing. So it can really be important for you to show the experience that you had, what you see, and share that with your peers, with your family, with your friends, colleagues, and so on. And of course have those. Well, I think we need to think that ultimately a normal person that does not work with dolphins and whales. So if your job is not to work with dolphins and whales and the conservation of these animals, and you're just a citizen that is concerned and wants to do something good for these animals, you can start by doing things that seem that it's not going to have a direct impact on the animals, but are very important for the ecosystem where these animals live, right? So if we save water, I know it is a little bit of a cliche, but those cliches really make the difference. So if we save water, if we reduce the use of plastic, if we reuse materials and try to give a good lifespan of the materials, the clothes we wear every day, where are we getting our food from, you know, those things that might not seem that have a direct impact in the animal. So you as a citizen that just wants to make the difference, those are really the things that will make a difference at a global scale in the environment, and it's something that you can do in your daily basis. But if you want to really have a stronger impact on those animals, then I would say the best way it's really to support NGOs that are doing amazing work to protect these animals. So it's not something that, again, that you do, you know, it's not you doing it, but you are supporting those people that are studying these animals or protecting these animals, and will know what are the best actions to take in each of the cases. So I think really support, and either is financial or materially with materials or means, or even if it's just on social media and spreading, it's really important.
For young scientists looking to enter this field, like your field, what skills or experiences should they focus on?
Okay. So it is important. It is a competitive field, so it is important that you try to have you know, the most experiences. Sometimes I also think that some people get drawn into the dolphins and whale world because they're really enigmatic creatures. So people are, you know, they call really the attention, and in general, people want to save whales and dolphins. But sometimes the reality of working with these animals, it's not so romantic as the idea of it. So it becomes really tough to be a marine mammal scientist. It is a beautiful profession, but it is a very hard work profession, and it really demands from your body. Can you endure the long days at sea? Can you endure the weather? We need to deal with a lot of different types of weather. Either it's really cold or really hot. You know, do you get seasick? Do you not get seasick? But there's so much more that we can do than just field work. There's so much more at a analytical level, and there's so much more at a government level as well that can be done in terms of laws, policymaker, and so on. So that's really important. So I would just say to future researchers to have really hands-on experience with different methods and in different areas, and, you know, really see what you like, what you identify yourself with the most, and what you can be more beneficial as well to make the difference, if that's your goal.
Thank you so much for that advice and for all the questions you answered. It was extremely interesting.
Thank you.
I'm very glad to have had you in the podcast.
Much.
No, not at all. I have a lot more questions that are interesting, but that will jump the time frame of the episode. But I guess the people can go onto your website and your social media, the organization's social media, to then learn more about cetaceans. And thanks so much again for taking the time to do this episode with me.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a pleasure, and I hope people like it and that it makes a little bit of a difference.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you.